Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Here for Good, where we explore how transformational leaders create a positive impact on the world around them. Throughout history, inspirational leaders and organizations have always used the power of words to connect with emotion, galvanize communities, and enlist others in causes for change and good. At Virtua Health, we are changing the way people think and talk about health and well-being. So it is our privilege to tee up meaningful conversations with engaging social catalysts and thought leaders. Please welcome our host, Dennis Pullin, President and CEO of Virtua Health, as he sparks today's exciting conversation.
The Catholic Diocese of Camden serves close to 500,000 parishioners across southern New Jersey. And since February of 2013, it's been under the approachable, down-to-earth leadership of the Most Reverend Bishop Dennis Sullivan. A native New Yorker raised in the Bronx, he's the son of an Irish immigrant. Bishop Sullivan has strongly embraced his immigrant roots, always standing up for human and immigrant rights and speaking out against violence, racial intolerance, and civil injustice. Often described as a man of the people, Bishop Sullivan used his deep intellect and big heart to persistently question how the church can use its influence to do more for humankind. Ordained as a priest nearly 50 years ago, his many years of service on the Lower East Side of Manhattan gave him a special closeness and dedication to the immigrant communities, particularly those of Latino and Asian descent. Today, he's a vital and vibrant force in and around vulnerable communities. Never afraid to take on controversy, Bishop Sullivan has served as a member of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops' Committee on Child Protection. And on a personal note, I have had the privilege of working with Bishop Sullivan, and we continue to experience many defining moments together. And I am grateful for his partnership, dedication, and commitment. Bishop Sullivan, welcome to Here for Good.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I thank you very much for inviting me.
What is the biggest misconception about being a bishop?
The biggest on the part of people's misconception of what a bishop is all about?
Yes.
I think a lot of people think it's a life of privilege, and some even think that whatever the bishop says goes. Mm-hmm. And that certainly has not been my experience. And I think particularly Catholics have their understanding of a bishop from previous generations, and things have changed for the better in terms of the ministry of the bishop, the work of the bishop, the presence of the bishop, the availability of the bishop.
So as the world has changed, so has the role of the bishop?
Well, very clearly, yeah. Very much. And I think particularly in the past, the bishop was kind of held to higher standards even, and separated from the people, not from the people, even though he is from the people, and kind of kept at a distance from the people. I think that's part of the misconceptions. You know, with the priests of the diocese, the bishop is supposed to be their father and their brother. And that's a very, very hard role to play.
Right. Well, let's go back a little bit. So you say the role has changed a little bit as the world has changed. Now, when you, shortly after your ordination, you were sent to Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. How did that experience change you?
Oh, well, it introduced me to Latino culture, and two very different expressions of Latino culture. Sometimes people think because people speak Spanish, they're all the same, but they're not. Those are two different nations, two very clearly different cultures. And I went to Puerto Rico to school, language school. It was a very organized language program. And because Puerto Rico is part of the United States, English is available everywhere. And a very wise mentor said, no, you can't stay there after the classes. You've got to go into a situation where no one speaks English. And that's how I ended up in Dominican Republic and Santo Domingo because no one did speak English.
It's interesting. One of the things that we're always challenged with in healthcare is cultural competency and trying to be able to address the health needs of those cultures that we don't always understand. So in addition to learning Spanish, you also gained some proficiency in Mandarin and Cantonese to better communicate with your Chinese members. What sort of impact has speaking the language had on your parishioners as you've been able to speak to them in their native tongues and your ability to connect with them and to be impactful?
Well, I think being able to say something, I am bilingual in Spanish. I'm not bilingual in Mandarin or Cantonese. I learned a lot of phrases, a lot of words. Once I left Chinatown, New York's Chinatown, I really became distant from that, unfortunately, except for the food. I love
You still like the food.
Oh, I love it.
Don't we all?
But the impact of being able to even say hello, how are you? In my situation, God bless you, in Mandarin or in Spanish, it makes a huge. People then know this man likes me. This man is
or gets me.
Yeah, exactly.
Understands.
And words bear that. Although you don't have to speak the language. I always tell that to my priests. The language of the heart is even a more powerful language, and people know that you love them. You might not look like them. You might not be from their particular culture, but they know that you love them, and that's such an important language also. And I think that's very, very important in medicine.
It absolutely is. So many credit the church for the term servant leader. Mm-hmm. What does that phrase mean to you, and how can other organizations use that approach or this approach?
Well, that phrase is a biblical phrase. I mean, it traces all the way to the Jewish Bible, to the prophet Isaiah. He has these wonderful servant poems that are very precious parts of that particular book of the Bible. And then it became applied to Jesus. Jesus is the servant leader. Jesus is a servant. So in ministry, in Christian ministry, all Christian ministers look to imitate the servant Jesus. Even, the Pope, one of the titles of the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, is servant of the servants of God. So even he has that title, and it's a reminder that that's what ministry is about. That's what this is not a job. This is a ministry. And ministry is a service, and it's a service that is graciously offered and freely offered and done for us in imitation of the service of the Lord Himself.
But how can you take that and for leaders of other organizations outside of the church and sort of have that to translate in a very workable way?
Well, I think just to use that title, servant, helps them understand what their job is all about, what their particular function in the organization is about.
Is it about a greater or a higher purpose?
Exactly,
something greater than oneself?
Exactly, yeah. It's beyond oneself. And, for example, in an organization such as a health care organization, the service is to people who are served by the organization. And I think that can kind of inspire people and give them a goal.
Because I think the purpose of any healthcare organization in particular is to improve the overall health and well-being of that community in which we serve. And so we think about it in terms of serving the community. And so that is very important. So you have a responsibility to your diocese. Of course, we know that. But that also requires you to cultivate relationships with organizations and entities beyond the church. So how do you build that connection, and what sort of challenges are there in making sure that you sort of stay true to the church's mission and vision?
I was privileged to be 21 years on the Lower East Side as a pastor in a very poor parish. And I don't know if you know that neighborhood, that area of Manhattan at all. It's America's original Disneyland, I always called it. I met there and worked with all kinds of people who I might have disagreed with philosophically, people whose lifestyle certainly would not be something that I would approve. But one thing I learned from that great mix of people on the Lower East Side in all the different community-based organizations that I worked with and was involved with is that you respect them, they respected me. We learned that we could be partners in bettering the lives of people and bettering the communities that we were living in the same community. And if
you could do that in America's greatest melting pot, then you should be able to do that anywhere. So did you see when you made the transition from New York City to Camden, were there any special challenges that you experienced in the transition that made that more difficult, or was it easy to do because you had that sort of melting pot experience?
It was never difficult for me. It was easy, and it was because really of the years of experience that I had dealing with all sorts of people, all kinds of organizations. I learned to respect these people. I learned to love a lot of them and work with them. And because I knew that their work was the same work that I was doing, I might have been doing it out of a different motivation.
Or a different approach.
Yeah. You know, I had a great tragedy down there because the church was a very old building. It's still there, thank God. We were able to save it. There was a huge collapse of this ceiling in the facility. It was built in 1843, and the diocese purchased it in 1862, I believe, and turned it into a Catholic church. And because they never had much money, they weren't able to put much work into maintaining the fabric of the building. So the inner ceiling collapsed, 60,000 pounds of plaster. And then it was up to me to figure out where I was going to save my parish, how I was going to get these people back on a Sunday, where we were going to go. And I knew where to go immediately because I had a very deep relationship with the Jewish neighborhood organization down the block from the church. I went down there and spoke to Marion Laser, she was the CEO there, and explained my problem. I needed a place for people to come on Sunday. I had about 700-800 parishioners. I needed to get them together on Sunday. And she looked at me and she said to me, "Your people are my people. My auditorium is your auditorium." And, you know, we were there for 7 months. We even had Christmas there. And it was just, I think, that was a result of the relationships that I had built up, particularly at the Jewish community down there. Old Jewish New York was very close to the parish. And so I brought all of that to Camden, my ability from my experience of being able to deal with all sorts of people and individuals. That doesn't mean I have to give up what I believe, and I don't expect them to believe what I believe, but we're able to, to make the world better.
You said something a moment ago about just change. So some companies feel constrained by the culture of an organization that were perhaps decades old. You know, the church's culture has evolved over centuries. Right. How do you adapt that to the changing times?
Well, I think what I do is I look to the tradition, the Catholic tradition, and I understand the Catholic tradition, and I do my best to apply it to the present situation, whatever it might be. And respecting the tradition, and the tradition informs the particular action that I'm going to do, and how I'm going to run a specific program or something. So I don't deny the tradition. I don't turn my back on it.
But you recognize that there may be nuances to that tradition that makes it more applicable to what we're dealing with today. Exactly. I mean, the world changes, and the church needs to adapt to that, and without giving up its principles, without giving up what it sincerely believes as part of the treasury of her faith. You know. Let's talk a little bit about principles. So, your father drove a taxi.
That's right. He was a great cab driver.
And your mom, she came over on a boat as a child from Ireland.
That's right.
And worked as a waitress. Mm-hmm. How did they shape sort of your leadership style, your principles? Talk to me a little bit about that foundation that they provided you.
Well, both of them were very hard workers. Both of them were very joyful people, jovial people. They had lots and lots of friends, and we had a wonderful family experience. My two brothers and my sister and I, and I think from them I learned hard work is part of life, and so I've done that in my ministry over the years, whether I was a parish priest or now as a bishop. Certainly, they kind of set the road for me by their example.
Were there others or another priest in your immediate family?
No. Well, actually, my mother had a cousin that was a priest, yeah, but no.
Was there a particular experience in your life that sort of redirected your course, or that led you to know that this was your calling, this is what you were meant to do?
One of the recent, just use the word, experiences was 9/11. Because I was downtown, I was there when that horror took place, and I remember being on Henry Street where the church was located as we were pulling out chairs from the lower church and setting up because people were running with all this stuff in their eyes and in their face, and we were washing them and helping them to kind of get on their way, and that whole experience of 9/11, because where I lived down there, that went on for months and months and months. We lost our telephones, computers late that afternoon. We didn't get it back until January.
You know, I can imagine many folks that lost so much, but their faith also sustained them.
Sustained, yeah, absolutely. The 9/11 was such a shock. I remember 2 days later going down back nearer to the site because the priests of the church that was right next to it had to move in with me. They had to get out of their rectory, and we went back 2 days later. And I remember walking across City Hall Park up to our knees, the contents of people's desks, and I couldn't believe that this is New York City. This is what the world has come to, and something is very wrong. And I think that experience just convinced me that I needed to make sure that I never hated anyone or disrespected anyone, or whether for their religion, their way of life, their philosophy, whatever, because that was the result of terrible hate.
It is my hope that we never have to experience something of that nature again.
Absolutely, yeah.
Before I let you go, what do you see as perhaps the greatest challenge for the church in the foreseeable future?
Well, I think for the church, some of the great challenges are understanding and trying to relate to some of the new expressions of sexuality, and I think that's something that the church has to learn to get right and maybe do it better. Also, I think, unfortunately, we've had this crises that's, with some of our members, our priest members, and I think we've learned a lot from that. And
you think that's as a result of the light that sort of has been shined on it, and as well as the commitment of the Catholic Church to do something proactive about it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think we've learned from our mistakes and our sins, and I think we have something to offer organizations because of how we've handled this, even though it's a horrible page in our history. But it's there, so you have to deal with it and be honest about it. I think things like that. In the church, we really you think in centuries, not tomorrow. But
right.
I think we can, particularly in some of those areas, do it better.
Well, great. So I have to ask you this question. I ask everybody who has been so kind and generous with their time with me, what would your 18-year-old self think about who you are today?
I think you'd be shocked.
How so? I can't let you off with just saying that. How so?
Well, at 18, I was beginning to go to college, and I thought I was in love with some young lady, and just things changed over the years, and I think my 18-year-old self, it's even hard to think back to that, would be shocked to know how my life evolved,
Really?
And even sometimes I look back and think, how did I get here?
Well, let's talk about that. I know that there has probably been people that were influential in your life or experiences that sort of change your direction or your course. Anybody in particular that you can really
I would
speak
name
to?
certain teachers of mine over the years. I had an incredible teacher in my junior year in high school. He had us reading Steinbeck and all the great American novelists, and he just opened up a world, I know for me, that I carried with me as I went on with my education. He's certainly someone that I think back on with great appreciation for how he made me understand the beauty of literature and the dynamic of literature, the power of literature, and the message of literature. He's someone I think in my education and other teachers also. They were in the seminary. There were two professors who were very influential on me. One of them was the one who called me one day and said to me, "Have you ever thought about serving in the inner city?" And I kind of like stopped and I said, "No." He said, "Well, think about it. I think you'd be good at it." And
50 years later?
50 years later, yeah, I'm in Camden.
Bishop Sullivan, thank you for an enlightening and inspiring conversation today. You've certainly challenged us to be a little more purposeful on our journey to be here for good.
Well, I'm delighted that I did that, and I want to thank you once again for inviting me. It's been a pleasure and a delight to have this conversation.
Look forward to our continued partnership.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Here for Good. If you liked what you heard, please leave us feedback and share our podcast link with others. Until next time, be well, everyone.